I've been in the States for 12 years. And also as an individual living in the 21st century, one of the cultural transitions that I continue to encounter on a personal level is the balance between individual right versus the idea of community. Pretty consistently, one of the areas that I'm told is that I need to work on is on speaking up. Speaking up. Either in classrooms in seminary 12 years ago, or when I participate in a continuing education in a leadership development, I am learning that speaking up is important. And if you don't speak up, if you don't, your opinion or thought can't matter, which makes very clear sense to me. And sometimes in a form of encouragement, and sometimes in a harsher way, I'm continuing to work on speaking up. The reason I need to work on speaking up is because it is not in my nature. Of course, some might say it's a personality thing, being an introvert myself, but I wonder how much of my personality comes from the culture that I was brought up. So growing up in a Korean family, I never viewed speaking up or standing out as a virtue. Instead, I viewed myself as a droplet in a wide ocean. A droplet in the wide ocean. Viewing individual life as a contribution to a bigger communal effort towards a common good. Community was at a higher value, a greater value than my individuality. And in schools, in Korea, you wouldn't see too much of questioning in classroom, at least the classroom that I attended. Of course, it wasn't dismissed totally if a college student raised their hand, but my preference was that the class would end on time, and though studious curiosity only causes a delay in the dismissal. That way, everyone's schedule could be respected, because someone might have a back-to-back class they have to run to without having to feel bad about getting up and disrupting other people's attention to the professor. From a Western perspective, this kind of culture may be interpreted as uniformity, right? It may be viewed almost as some extreme cases, militant environment where individual voice is ignored, a submissive style of life, being oppressive, stomping on the voices of the powerless for the sake of preservation and survival of the bigger system. And as a neighbor to a state where they say it's better to die if you can't live freely, we Vermonters to reject this ideology where community is in a greater value than the individual rights. These images are somewhat viewed as something negative, something going towards the opposite direction of what we thrive towards to. And even though there is a temptation to take this topic into a political spectrum, which may be impossible to totally detach ourselves from, given the news coverage we see and hear nowadays. Yet I am approaching this in a much more interpersonal level with the hope to take it deeper into a spiritual reflection. So when I read the words from Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 21, there was something about it. There was something about it that was shouting at me. After a week of Democratic National Convention and then a week of Republican National Convention, and all the commentaries and coverages that made the gap of our divisiveness even more vivid. And in the midst of all of that, another Black man by the name of Jacob Blake was shot 7 times from his back while his 3 children were watching in the car. Perhaps I thought the words from Romans chapter 12 were exactly what we needed to hear this week. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Verse after verse, powerful teachings about what love looks like in human life. Perhaps we needed to hear them. Or did we? As my week went on, and as I reflected on these words again and again, I realized that I already knew them. Loving one another, living in harmony with one another, living at peace with everyone. As a Christian and as a pastor myself, I knew those teachings very well. Well, then, why do I feel so far away from these beautiful words about love? Why? Is this something that I need to tap into the Department of Psychology to figure out the level of stress that this world is carrying right now due to pandemic, which then turns into frustration and anger? Or am I so honest and innocent in saying that how long can love be one-sided? I am loving, but they are the one being judgmental. I don't hate anybody. That's just not who I am. And yet, we feel the burning coal on our heads. No matter how beautiful Paul's interpretation of love is, we find ourselves searching for the buts to justify the stress we carry. Perhaps living in this culture where the freedom, if misunderstood, the freedom boosts our egocentric worldview, if misunderstood. Where freedom of speech, if misunderstood, is saying whatever we feel like saying, not caring how poisonous it can be to others. Not realizing that our tongue can set a small spark to set the whole forest on fire. Letting go of all of our buts. Letting go of our ego. That's the huge hurdle that is in our way towards the love that Paul is talking about. And this is so hard. This is so hard. There were There were a few hours during this past week when Hyoen, my wife, and I wasn't talking to each other. It was over an argument, basically about me not being more helpful around the house. But at that moment, I didn't believe in that. I didn't believe that. So I took my lesson about speaking up seriously at a wrong timing. I argued back. I tweaked the narrative so that it wasn't all my fault. And as soon as I started to take the egocentric route, it was no longer a conversation between us. I went upstairs to my study, and on my desk, there was my Bible, open to the passage from Romans. I began to read the words. Love must be sincere. Live in harmony. Live at peace with everyone. It was a struggle because I knew my heart was nowhere near those words. So I read it again. Love must be sincere. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. I tried and tried so that these words meant anything to the anger I was fuming out. But they didn't. There even was a sense of disappointment too, about myself, because I wasn't being able to get through my emotions. And I was even thinking to myself, what's the point of preaching social justice? What's the point of preaching about peace out there if I can't have peace in here? In my own household. A lengthy time passed by, yet I was still struggling. By this time, realizing how stupid the fight was, I so wanted to fly down the 13 steps in the staircase to downstairs. But my ego was standing firm in the way. The longer the time went by, I think a part of me, part of my ego, was fueling to prove that I wasn't all wrong. So I began praying with my eyes closed. I began to look into my inner self, asking myself, what's going on in you? What's going on? And then I tried to be attentive to the different parts of my body. I realized that I was having a headache. I realized that I was hurting myself. So I told myself, Yunki, don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to yourself. I decided to lie down for a moment, hoping that a short nap might help. Time passed by, perhaps longer than what it felt like for me. All of a sudden, I realized Hyoen next to me, just gently lying down towards me without any words. What that was is, to me, she overcame the 13 steps of ego, which I failed to overcome. And because she did, there was healing. And I thank her for that. And I learned that that's a great model of how you speak up with boldness, even without speaking a word. A pastor once shared with me that our Christian journey is a journey from ego boosting to ego releasing. From ego boosting to ego releasing. And he said this was extremely hard. It's so hard that it is like going through death towards resurrection. Letting go of ourselves, releasing of our ego on the cross. And then we rise again with Christ from the depth of breathless water. That's what the life of Jesus Christ was about. And today, Paul is trying to tell us what that life of Christ, the love of Christ, might look like in our own lives. So perhaps there is a much more important cultural shift that I need to work on. And that is from the ego boosting culture to the ego releasing one. And again, it's hard. It's hard. That's why it's so hard to simply love one another. That's why it's so hard to simply live in harmony and peace with one another. It's hard. But at least we know where to start. Jesus Christ showed us on the cross where to start. Jesus Christ showed us on the cross where to start. So let's try. As you heard my story, I need some work to do, a lot of work to do. And who knows if we discover that love was only 13 steps away all along.